Horror has always been about fear, but the kind of fear we experience has changed. There was a time when the genre lived on jump scares, monsters, and gallons of fake blood. The formula was simple: shock the players, then let them breathe. But over time, developers realized that fear could be more complex, that the most disturbing monsters weren't the ones lurking in the dark, they were the ones hiding inside us. Psychological horror just doesn't scare you, it gets under your skin. It toys with perception, manipulates emotion, and leaves a residue of unease that lingers long after the credits roll. From Silent Hill 2's guilt-ridden hallucinations to Amnesia's sanity-shattering descent and Alan Wake 2's reality-bending duality, horror grew up. It got smarter, more introspective, and more human. To understand how horror evolved, we have to go back to its origins. In the early 90s, horror was still discovering what it could be. Games like Alone in the Dark set the stage with eerie mansion settings, fixed camera angles, and that unmistakable sense of vulnerability. These titles were revolutionary, but their fear came from limitations. Hardware constraints meant developers couldn't rely on subtle storytelling, so they used what they had: clunky controls, harsh lighting, and the primal fear of being hunted. By 1996, Resident Evil had cemented what we now call survival horror. It gave us resource scarcity, slow pacing, and creatures that made every corridor feel like a gamble. But the fear remained external: the zombies, the virus, the grotesque mutations. They were tangible threats. You weren't questioning your reality, you were just trying not to die. It worked. Players screamed, jumped, and replayed. But emotional death? That wasn't part of the formula yet. The early era of horror taught developers what worked mechanically, but not yet what worked psychologically. Then came Silent Hill 2 in 2001, a game that didn't just change horror, it redefined its purpose. While Resident Evil focused on surviving a nightmare, Silent Hill 2 asked, what if the nightmare came from you? Its protagonist, James Sunderland, doesn't arrive in Silent Hill to escape monsters. He comes searching for his dead wife after receiving a letter from her. From the very first steps into the fog, the game feels wrong. Not in a jump scare way, but in a psychological way. The fog conceals more than danger, it conceals truth. Every monster represents something about James: his guilt, his repression, his denial. Pyramid Head isn't just a villain, he's punishment made flesh. He doesn't exist without James's guilt. He is the guilt. Even the environment tells the story. The dilapidated apartments, the decaying hospital, the shifting map, each reflects James' emotional decay. And the game's genius lies in how it lets players interpret everything. There's no explicit evil force guiding events, it's all metaphor, layered under disturbing imagery and subtle dialogue. When you finally learn the truth that James killed his wife, the horror becomes personal. The monsters, the hallucinations, the endless purgatory, it's all self-inflicted, and that revelation hits harder than any jump scare ever could. Silent Hill 2 taught the industry that horror didn't need to be about shock value. It could be about emotional truth. It was the first time a game truly held up a mirror to the player and said, maybe you're the thing you should be afraid of. After Silent Hill 2, developers started experimenting with more subtle forms of fear. Horror became introspective, more focused on atmosphere, psychology, and emotion. Games like Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly told stories about loss and guilt through ghost photography, turning the act of facing fear directly into gameplay. You had to look horror in the eye to survive. Rule of Rose explored childhood trauma, cruelty, and manipulation, wrapping its themes in dreamlike surrealism that unsettled rather than shocked. Haunting Ground used vulnerability, not as punishment, but as sympathy. You weren't a fighter, you were a victim of circumstances, and that powerlessness wasn't frustrating, it was the point. These games prove something crucial. You didn't need grotesque visuals to disturb someone, you just need to make them feel. By 2010, horror had entered a new phase, one where the line between player and character started to blur. Amnesia: The Dark Descent was a masterclass in vulnerability. It took away your weapons, your confidence, and even your mind. Every mechanic in Amnesia serves one purpose: disempowerment. You can't fight back. You can only run, hide, or pray. And then came the twist: your sanity. The more time you spend in darkness, the more your mind begins to unravel. Your vision distorts, whispers crawl through your headphones, even your footsteps become unpredictable. Look too long at a monster, and you lose grip on reality. But if you refuse to look, you can't track where it's coming from. The game forces you to choose between knowledge and stability. It's brilliant because it transforms fear into mechanics. You're not just scared because of the environment. You're scared because your mind is breaking. When the screen tilts and the whispers become louder, it's not just your character losing sanity, it's you. You start doubting your own senses. And that's where psychological horror thrives, in the space between what's happening and what your brain thinks is happening. Amnesia wasn't the first game to mess with perception, but it was one of the first to make sanity a gameplay system, and it paved the way for games like Outlast, Soma, and Layers of Fear to take those ideas even further. Fast forward to 2023, and Alan Wake 2 just shows how far psychological horror has come. This isn't a game about surviving, it's a game about understanding. Remedy built it like a story trapped inside itself with two protagonists, experiencing different layers of the same nightmare. You play as Saga Anderson, an FBI agent piecing together a ritualistic murder case, and as Alan Wake, a writer trapped in a supernatural dimension where stories become real. Every shift between them blurs the boundary between fiction and reality. When Alan writes a scene, the world changes. When Saga discovers something, Alan's story bends to fit her discovery. This duality, this interplay between perception and authorship, is the new face of psychological horror. You're no longer just questioning your surroundings, you're questioning who's telling the story. And that uncertainty is terrifying. Unlike older horror titles, Alan Wake 2 doesn't rely on traditional scares. It builds dread through narrative rhythm, pacing, sound, lighting, and tone. It wants you to feel trapped in meaning itself. That's the hallmark of modern psychological horror. Fear not of monsters, but of truth. So what makes psychological horror work on a design level? It's not just narrative, it's control. Developers craft unease by limiting what the player can trust. Vision, audio, even basic rules of the game world. Everything becomes unstable. Lighting flickers not for atmosphere but for disorientation. Soundscapes include whispers that make you check over your shoulder. Music swells when nothing happens, training you to anticipate fear where there is none. It's about anticipation over reaction. Psychological horror thrives on what the brain does between the scares. It uses suggestion, implication, and uncertainty as tools of terror. Games like Soma question the nature of consciousness itself. Observer turns cyberpunk dystopia into an existential nightmare. And Inscription and Doki Doki Literature Club weaponize the meta layer, breaking the fourth wall to make the player complicit. The message across all of them is clear. True horror isn't the monster, it's realizing that maybe you're the one keeping it alive. Horror reflects us, our culture, our anxieties, our fears. When horror games focused on gore, it was because technology limited subtlety. But now, with realism and narrative complexity at our fingertips, horror has evolved into something more mature, something more human. Psychological horror reminds us that fear isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it's guilt, Sometimes it's loss. Sometimes it's the realization that the scariest thing of all is ourselves. From Silent Hill 2 to Amnesia, from Alan Wake 2 to whatever comes next, the genre continues to challenge what fear can mean. It's not about monsters in the dark anymore. It's about the dark inside the monsters, and the dark inside us. When horror games get smart, they stop trying to make you scream and started trying to make you think. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration of how fear evolved, give this video a like, share it with another horror fan, and let me know in the comments which psychological horror game stayed with you long after you stopped playing.